and welcome to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. And on tonight's program, a House Democrat formally calls for Biden to drop out. Meanwhile, 100 Chinese migrants are deported in one weekend. And HHS pushes abortion after a Supreme Court ruling. Well, before we get into our top coverage for the day, I'd like to introduce my co-host who will be stepping in for Samuel Case, and that's FISM's Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Renata, and I would like to say a happy Independence Day Eve to you and everyone else in the FISM studio.
Oh yes, right back at you.
Oh, thank you very much.
And well, with that said, pressure is mounting on President Joe Biden to end his re-election campaign. Texas Representative Lloyd Doggett is the first Democratic lawmaker to publicly urge Biden to withdraw from the race, though dozens more are allegedly preparing to follow suit. The longtime House representative said he was hoping the debate between Trump and Biden would provide some momentum for Biden, but that didn't happen. Doggett said in a statement, quote, "Instead of reassuring voters, the president failed to effectively defend his many accomplishments and expose Trump's many lies." He said it's time for Joe Biden to pass the torch to someone else in his party. But the White House insists that Biden will continue running against Trump. Here's Vice President Kamala Harris saying just that.
Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again, period.
Are you ready to lead the country if necessary?
I am proud to be Joe Biden's running mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
According to 7 senior sources in the Biden campaign, Harris could be a top pick to replace the president should he withdraw from his re-election campaign.
But with all that being said, despite Biden's persistence to stay in the race and his team's persistence in having him stay in the race, it sounds as though that even the president is somewhat seeing the writing on the wall. According to a Biden ally who spoke with the New York Times, the president has pinned his success on re-election on an upcoming interview with ABC News this week. He's also reportedly putting some pressure on upcoming campaign stops in both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And if these do not go as well as he plans, then the president might actually decide to bow out of the race. However, White House Deputy Press Secretary Andrew Bates said that this report was, quote, absolutely false. So this is something that we'll be keeping an eye on. Meanwhile, let's turn to former President Donald Trump, whose sentencing for his hush money case was actually pushed back in order to account for a future challenge. Manhattan Supreme Court Judge Juan Merchan issued an order on Tuesday, which moved Trump's sentencing from July 18th to September 18th. The order was issued after Trump's legal team requested an extension to challenge this conviction. It also comes amid Monday's Supreme Court ruling, which gave former presidents presumptive immunity for all official acts in office. Trump's lawyers now have until July 10th to file a motion on the hush money verdict. Prosecutors have until July 24th to file their response. Judge Merchan said that he expects to reach a decision on this matter by September 6th, and if necessary, the sentencing will still be conducted on September 18th.
And in a break from tradition, the Republican National Committee will not allow reporters or coverage of the proceedings to amend its party platform. While the work of the group's platform committee is usually covered by C-SPAN, this will not be the case at this year's national convention in Milwaukee. The platform committee is scheduled to meet next week to work on the final proposal for the Republican Party's 2024 platform. But this year, the 3-day event will be closed to the public. While an RNC spokesman told reporters that verified guests will be allowed, recently disclosed emails showed that many activists are being denied access. Next week's committee meeting will mark the first time since 2016 that the Republican Party has updated its platform. And at the same time, many are closely watching what is decided on abortion, since the party hasn't officially announced its stance on the issue. While many in the party have pushed for a national abortion ban, others have called on Republicans to endorse leaving the issue at a state level.
Just more interesting news coming out as soon as we come up on the 2024 presidential election. But for a minute now, let's look again at the Supreme Court, which recently denied hearing a Second Amendment challenge. On Tuesday, the Supreme Court justices declined to review a decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit regarding a law in Illinois. This law prohibited assault-style weapons, including certain semi-automatic rifles and large-capacity magazines. The challenge to this ban has also been before the Supreme Court twice before, as it was still making its way through the lower courts. But both of those times, the justices declined to take the case, waiting for legal proceedings to play out, as they now have. So this most recent rejection follows another decision from the Supreme Court, which was to not consider the constitutionality of another weapons ban, but this time in Maryland. However, Justice Samuel Alito did say that for that rejection, he would have granted the bid to hear out the case, even though that it was still moving through the judicial system.
Meanwhile, in the economy, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell touted significant progress in taming historic inflation yesterday. His comments to a Portugal banking conference come days after federal data shows that the annual core price increase fell to 2.6% in May. That's the lowest reading in more than 3 years.
I think the last reading and the one before it in inflation, the one before it to a lesser extent, do suggest that we are getting back on a disinflationary path.
Now, despite this report, he says central bank policymakers want greater confidence that inflation is trending towards 2% before loosening its restrictive monetary policy.
We want to be more confident, and frankly, because the U.S. economy is strong and the labor market is strong, we have the ability to take our time and get this right, and that's what we're planning to do. We're well aware that if we go too soon, that we could undo the good work we've done in bringing down inflation, and if we go too late, we could unnecessarily undermine the recession, the recovery, and the expansion.
U.S. stocks rallied yesterday following the remarks. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ both closed at record highs. Notably, it's the first time the S&P has capped 5,500 at the closing bell.
And finally, let's go to news in the economy as well, where the Biden administration sold off 1 million more barrels of gas from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve yesterday. And that now amounts to 42 million gallons of gasoline sold total. Officials say that it's a bid to lower prices ahead of what's expected to be a busy and record-breaking July 4th traveling season, and will help hardworking Americans who need it most. Those in the Northeast will see the most benefit from this sale, and one official praised the decision, saying that congressional Republicans don't actually have a proposal to lower costs. The GOP previously accused the administration of putting national security at risk by draining the petroleum reserve for purely political purposes. And when we come back, we look into some world news from Haiti all the way to China. Don't go anywhere.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
When a woman experiences an unplanned pregnancy, she's faced with a difficult decision. Preborn connects with life-affirming pregnancy clinics across the nation and provides them with free ultrasound sessions for expectant mothers. When a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound and hears their heartbeat, it doubles the chance she'll choose life. Visit preborn.com/life to save a baby's life.
Fear and uncertainty can cause us to hold things tightly and rely on ourselves. But during uncertain times, as believers in Christ, we are called to surrender fully to our sovereign God. Learn a biblically responsible investment strategy proven over 25 years. Keep the money God has entrusted to you out of companies that participate in things that God detests. Fully surrender. Become a Financial Issues Partner today.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's move now to some world news, as I mentioned before the break there, starting with an update to the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. The Lebanese terror group affirmed that it would continue attacking Israel, this coming from Hezbollah's deputy leader Sheikh Naim Qassem, who affirmed in an interview with the Associated Press that attacks from Hezbollah would continue unless there is a ceasefire in Gaza. However, the attacks would stop only if a formal ceasefire is agreed upon. Qassem said that if Israel were to withdraw from the region without a formal ceasefire agreement, then Hezbollah's reaction would depend on the shape, results, and impacts of Israel's withdrawal. Qassem also said that their attacks on Israel have been in support of Hamas as Israel moves to eliminate its military and governing capabilities. But Israel, in response, says that it's still sticking to its guns with regards to Hezbollah. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant issued a statement in which he says that they are ready, quote, to take any action required in Lebanon or to reach an arrangement from a position of strength.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is announcing more aid for Ukraine. According to the Department of Defense, Austin plans to send an additional $2.3 billion to help the Eastern European country in its struggle against Russia. According to Major General Pat Ryder's press release, the package will include a significant number of urgently needed air defense interceptors, as well as artillery and anti-tank weapons. The agreement was a result of Austin's meeting with the Ukrainian defense minister at the Pentagon yesterday. The two have pledged to remain in close contact with each other. This comes just weeks after the U.S. and Ukraine signed a pact committing America to 10 years of Ukrainian defense training, aid supplies, and intelligence sharing. It also comes 1 week ahead of a NATO summit in Washington, D.C.
And let's turn now to the United Nations, which is honing in on the chaos in Haiti and specifically focusing on the plight of children in the island nation. According to the UN's Children's Agency, gang violence in Haiti has displaced more than 300,000 children since March of this year. Of the near 580,000 people total who have become homeless, children make up more than half of that number. In addition, a video released by UNICEF on the tragic situation says that a child is displaced every minute in Haiti due to this gang violence. UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell said in a statement that these displaced kids, quote, are in desperate need of a safe and protective environment and increased support and funding from the international community. Gangs in Haiti are still in control of at least 80% of the capital of Port-au-Prince, according to recent estimates. In addition, over 2,500 people have been killed or injured, and that's just in the first 3 months of this year.
Meanwhile, back in the U.S., the Department of Homeland Security is deporting large numbers of illegal Chinese immigrants. The DHS announced yesterday that the U.S. deported more than 100 Chinese migrants over the weekend, marking the largest repatriation effort in 6 years. This comes as lawmakers and national security experts have been sounding the alarm over a major uptick in Chinese nationals entering the U.S. illegally. The DHS said that it's been working with China to reduce and deter irregular immigration and to disrupt illicit human smuggling through expanded law enforcement efforts. In 2023, Border Patrol arrested over 37,000 Chinese migrants at the southern border, and many Chinese nationals who crossed into the U.S. seek to claim political asylum. However, conservative lawmakers remain skeptical as most of the illegal immigrants are single military-aged men.
Certainly more to keep in mind there as far as the border crisis is concerned. But while we're talking about China, let's go over to that part of the world where China is actually escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait after seizing a fishing boat from Taiwan itself. The incident happened last night near a group of islands owned by the self-governing Taiwan that are only 6 miles from the Chinese mainland. Beijing imposed a fishing ban in the area until August 15th and has accused this crew of 5 of breaking that prohibition. On the same day, however, China and the Philippines also jointly agreed that there was a need to restore trust and rebuild confidence around maritime disputes. Both sides still claim sovereignty over Second Thomas Shoal, where the Chinese Coast Guard seriously injured a Filipino sailor last month. However, they both have agreed to de-escalate tensions in that area. All the while, Manila officials say that they will remain, quote, relentless in protecting its claims in the West Philippine Sea.
And China is also rapidly expanding its surveillance capabilities in America's backyard. It's known that the Chinese Communist Party has been collaborating with Cuba since at least 2019. But the new Center for Strategic and International Studies is sounding the alarm about new upgrades to spy infrastructure. Satellite images show 4 expanded facilities, which means there are now multiple facilities on the island capable of intercepting and monitoring electronic signals. This raises concerns about sensitive U.S. transmissions and the CCP's expanded ability to spy on Americans. This comes as Beijing has been in a military cooperation with its trading partners in South and Central America. And we return with some national and cultural news after this next break. But first, let's go to a moment in history.
Hello friends, and welcome back to A Moment in History. We are here in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and today we're going to explore a military campaign that turned the tide of the Revolutionary War in favor of the Americans. And we're going to see how it helped the American Army win their freedom against the British. Let's go. So it feels very heroic here, standing on the front porch of what was Washington's headquarters, looking out and thinking, boy, what would the battle have looked like here? But remember, there was no battle at Valley Forge. In fact, the only battle that was fought here at Valley Forge happened to before the campaign began. The Americans arrived here at their camp for the winter of 1777 to 1778 in December. In September of that year, the Brits had raided the forgery in downtown Valley Forge, which by the way is where it gets its name, Valley Forge. They had raided that forgery, attacked it, taken some weapons, and burned it down. That was the only fighting that ever happened here during the American Revolution. So the Valley Forge campaign happened at a crucial time in the war. In 1777, the Brits had taken the city of Philadelphia roughly in the fall. So Valley Forge was really important because this was the opportunity for the Americans to take back the city of Philadelphia. And by the way, Philadelphia was a very, very strategic city at this point in the war. It was one of the biggest cities in the colonies. And so the colonials could not afford to lose Philadelphia. Now let's also talk for a second about the Commander-in-Chief, George Washington. General Washington was under tight scrutiny at this point from the men in the Continental Congress. He had had some failures in the previous years in certain battles, and this campaign at Valley Forge was really going to be the test of whether George Washington was going to be able to continue to lead the Americans, and especially lead them to victory. You can see behind me, these are cabins that would have looked like the cabins that the American soldiers built while they were here. These are not the original cabins, but rather these are what they probably would have looked like. Each of the cabins was roughly 14 by 16 feet, 14 feet wide by 16 feet long. And there were about 2,000 or so cabins at the Valley Forge encampment during this time. Now, there were roughly 12,000 American soldiers here, in addition to 400 or so women and children, so that's a lot of people. You think if you do the math right, that's around 5 to 10 people per cabin. Not great living quarters here for sure. There was great resilience among these American soldiers though, and they faced a lot. They faced a very, very harsh winter. Not the romanticized winter that we often think of when we think of Valley Forge. This would have been like any other winter that they would have faced. But they faced cold weather, certainly. They faced a lack of supplies, a lack of food, wild animals, and most importantly, they faced disease. Around 2,000 American soldiers died from various diseases such as typhoid or influenza, but they stood their ground, they stood strong, and that's part of the importance and significance here at Valley Forge. The campaign at Valley Forge is often called the birth of the true American Army, and this is where the Continental Army, which previously was a ragtag kind of bunch of just farmers and other people who came together, it became a premier fighting force, and the reason for that was General Washington's secret weapon, Baron von Steuben. Von Steuben was a fierce Prussian military officer, and Washington brought him on to train his ragtag soldiers into a premier fighting force that would challenge the Brits. Some people, when they study Valley Forge, they ask the question, why was Valley Forge significant if there was no battle fought here? Well, the reason for the significance is actually twofold. Number one, It solidified the American resolve and confidence in George Washington, who, by the way, kept his job. He was not fired, he was not relieved of his duties, but he was able to remain as the commander-in-chief of the Army and would eventually become the first president of the United States. Number two, it turned the American Army into a fierce fighting force. And sure enough, at the Battle of Monmouth in June of 1778, the first battle after the Americans left Valley Forge, the Americans defeated the British and took back Philadelphia. Now that's kind of an interesting story too. There was no battle over Philadelphia. The Brits just up and left. They just kind of got tired of Philadelphia. Maybe they didn't want to stay there, but they left, and the Americans were able to regain Philadelphia as well. And in 1783, the Americans finally defeated the British Army, winning their independence and beginning the nation that we call home today, the United States of America. Thanks so much for joining me here at Valley Forge for a moment in history.
Are you new to biblically responsible investing? As Christians, we have the responsibility to be good stewards of the money God has entrusted us with. As we invest in the market, we want to make sure that the companies we invest in aren't taking money and using it to fund industries that grieve the heart of God, like pornography, abortion, gambling, or the LGBT agenda. That doesn't mean a company must be a Christian company to be biblically responsible. It means that company is solely focused on excellence in its industry and doesn't support things that God hates. To learn more about biblically responsible investing and how you can put it to practice in your portfolio, go to financialissues.org.
The mission of Financial Issues is to expose Jesus for all he is, all he means, and all that he can do.
On the day I found I was pregnant, I was full of emotions and I just was so overwhelmed, and I don't know if I'm ready for this huge life-altering, changing commitment. I had individuals around me not wanting me to have this child. And somehow, and I was driving and I saw the Women's Help Center sign and I immediately turned in. That just took relief off of me, and I was like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. They gave me the confidence and the support that I needed to be able to go out and face the world. First time I held Finnegan, I just lit up with joy. I was so excited. This little boy that I had in my life, he is loving and generous. Watching him just grow and flourish into this incredible human being has just been so rewarding and so uplifting. Looking back, I don't know what I would do without him, because I needed him more than I think he needed me.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue in culture, where over the weekend, authorities in Ohio confirmed that almost 200 gravestones were damaged at 2 Jewish cemeteries in Cincinnati. The Cincinnati police and the FBI are currently investigating the incident, and the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati wrote in a statement that they unequivocally condemn this act of hatred and desecration, and their prayers go out to affected families. The incident is one of many recent anti-Semitic acts. The Anti-Defamation League reported a 140% increase in anti-Semitic attacks between 2022 and 2023, and the vandalism follows weekend protests in Chicago, where anti-Israel activists gathered outside the home of Jewish Congressman Brad Schneider on Saturday. After receiving noise complaints at about 3 a.m., authorities were sent to disperse the growing crowd. Congressman Schneider's office later condemned the late-night Sabbath protests as unconstructive and anti-Semitic.
And unfortunately, that isn't the only national news regarding Israel. On Monday, the United States' largest Presbyterian church organization voted to further distance itself from the State of Israel. At a meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA, or PCUSA for short, passed a resolution to divest from Israel bonds. The resolution called on the church's Presbyterian Foundation, as well as the Board of Pensions, to divest from government debt held by countries currently engaged in what they define as a military occupation. In a separate resolution, the church denounced what it called Christian Zionism as well, which is the belief that the modern state of Israel has a biblical mandate to exist. These resolutions come just 2 years after the church previously voted to declare Israel an apartheid state as well. But this isn't the only thing that PCUSA is up to, as the controversial votes come as the church's 2024 General Assembly is also debating a resolution that would require aspiring ministers to accept same-sex marriage in order to be ordained.
And in some other religious news, a Vermont pastor and his wife have been denied foster care over their beliefs. The couple, who already adopted 2 children through the foster care system, wanted to continue their efforts, but were unable to do so because of their Christian beliefs. Vermont revoked their foster care licenses earlier this year due to their conservative beliefs about gender and sexuality. Brian Wooty and his wife decided to sue the state alongside other couples. On Monday, the Alliance Defending Freedom Law Group filed a preliminary injunction asking the court to allow the foster parents to renew their licenses while the case is in process. The Wootys said they had always been in good standing with the state system until their beliefs about gender and sexuality became an issue for the government.
And let's look now at some other culture news, this time focusing in on abortion. It seems as though the Biden administration is now pushing the issue following a decisive Supreme Court action. For context, the Biden administration had previously sued Idaho, saying that its state law against abortion conflicted with the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, known as EMTALA for short. The government said the policy specifically prevents federally funded physicians from fulfilling an EMTALA requirement to provide emergency abortions in certain cases. The issue was brought before the Supreme Court, which did end up taking the case, but on Thursday of last week, the Supreme Court actually ruled that it jumped the gun by a little bit, as it agreed to hear the case just a bit too early. This resulted in sending the case back to lower courts, as well as reestablishing a district court order which allowed these doctors to perform emergency abortions for mothers whose health is at risk, and that does include in Idaho. And right now, the Biden administration is acting on that as well. The Department of Health and Human Services sent out a letter yesterday as a reminder of sorts, saying that it is, quote, a hospital's legal duty in order to fulfill this emergency abortion clause.
And lastly, a conservative think tank is shedding light on the billion-dollar transgender industry. A new American Principles Project report exposed the inner workings of the trans agenda, which it calls the gender industrial complex. The report highlights testimonies and medical insight into the $4 billion industry. One anonymous plastic surgeon recalled working with a patient coordinator from WPATH, an international trans activist group known for their unethical policies. The surgeon said the WPATH coordinator was always very pushy about doing more surgeries on trans-identifying patients. He added that there's big business behind these procedures since many surgeons get paid based on how many patients they operate on. According to the report, the total cost for a man to transition to a woman can cost up to $410,000. Meanwhile, surgery for women wanting to become men can cost up to $605,000. In short, doctors can make up to $500,000 per patient in the trans industry. And that's certainly concerning to hear, but I hope that more and more of these news will come out to the daylight as well. All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content. For any updates until our next show, follow us on social media at FISM News or download the FISM app on your smartphone. Thank you so much, God bless, and we'll see you next week.